sugar, you know, a small, sort of small molecule that's really easy to break down that every microbe can use, it'd be best. And people have tried to trace that. But if it's something more complex, like a sort of a gel, polysaccharides, there's some evidence suggesting that polysaccharides hang around in the soil for quite a while, a lot longer than we thought right now. And roots are really very important for forming aggregates, and their carbon for roots stays in the soil much longer, it looks like. So it could be very long if it got protected by the mineral elements of the soil and formed an aggregate. Good question.
So I like how all three topics focus on roots in the soil and what you're doing to them, whether you're leaving them or tearing them up and incorporating them. Should we be leaving more living roots in the soil, whether they're crops or weeds, to encourage rhizosphere? And how does that play with the things you guys do?
Well, I'll tell you just from the perspective of thinking about the microbes and things going on in the soil, that we do want to have active roots as much as possible. But if we can try to, have that work with the practical, I mean, that's the challenge. Is
I feel like the competition always seems to be for the more like the water in the basin or the crop growth, depending on the crop. Some cultivars will do better. But trying to deal with competition, like I have a colleague who says the only good mulch is end mulch, and he says that because of competition and trying to optimize the amount of living material in a planted commercial vegetable, like between the rows, planting Dutchman clover. It's all about how you manage the area where the crop is growing for competition, but if you have that in there and it's building so diverse communities, it's really interesting what that might mean over the long haul.
But at least if you have the crop in there, you still have, the soil's still growing plants. That's really the natural condition for soils, to have living plants in it, unless they're just dormant for a while, or, depending on the seasonal thing. So, I think that's really, really a challenge that we face, is trying to make our systems work for intercropping, so that we can, trying to cover more of the spatial part of the field when we're growing, especially vegetable crops. But look at grasses, which they've adapted to grow in crowded environments, and that's how they, eat corn. So, but we don't understand why, and I think that's, I think that may have something to do with the rhizosphere.
Speaking of dead mulch, this is for Anya. We've been banging our heads against the wall with rye for a long time too. We have a hard time, we're in Western Washington, have a hard time reaching physiological maturity with rye in time to put our target crop in. So we're experimenting with some barley, some early maturing barley, and they're showing quite a bit of promise. And we have some combinations of vetch and barley going now, but we haven't, they're overwintering now. For a positive note, but I just wondered if you
I don't know, when would barley mature here? Somebody who works with it, Ryan, do you know?
Well, I don't, but it's definitely a lot earlier than rye.
And there's some varieties that really put out a lot of biomass. Winter barleys that put out a lot of biomass in time to kill for squash.
Right. No, that's a great idea. I've been looking for something that's stock, that's got a nice stock like that, to be able to grow that I can kill in a timely fashion. It's been my main concern with wheat is an oats winter kill, and I'm going to provide the lift I need to be able to kill the vegetable.
How early does barley have to go in? I've been banging my head against the same issue too, in fact.
Oats and peas, that's the answer.
Well, our problem is that our growers aren't out of the field soon enough
For oats
to
and
get
peas.
oats and peas
Yeah.
in, which is why we use rye for everything.
Yeah, and we use rye more back here than we do barley. But there's a lot of varieties out there that you can try. We're planting the barley thinking it's in early October.
Okay.
Oh, that's late enough.
Yeah.
Another question over there? I don't know how to, hello?
It's back on the soil root thing. I'll throw it out anyway. I'm just wondering what the difference between a dead root and a live root.
know, I'm not saying that we need to just have live rhizospheres out there all the time. But you're right, it is different. As a plant, you know, goes through its life cycle, especially an annual, it looks like there's a succession in the microbial community that's in the rhizosphere. And so there's certain organisms that are associated with the root when it's really young and new. It changes as the plant ages and goes through its life cycle. And certainly around the dead root, there's going to be another kind of community that, you know, is there. And I think there's a lot of advantages if you can get to a no-till or reduced tillage system where you have, I'm not as worried. You've got, you know, parts of the soil, and so you've got plants that die, their roots are there, there's some kind of mulch. I mean, I think the worst is the bare fallow with nothing, you know, no plant presence at all. And then mulch, and then, you know, plants that died there, you still have that connection, so it can go through the full seasonal cycle. So, you know, it's going to change. We're not going to just keep the rhizosphere community there. Those microbes like to live in the rhizosphere, and then they sort of hang out in the soil to varying degrees. But they're not happy. They don't grow real fast. They wait again to meet a root before they take off.
Dead roots, as they decompose, will provide channels for water, other
Oh,
functions,
yeah.
so.
Form aggregates.
Aggregates.
Did I see another question over here? Brian?
I was just going back to the barley this back.
Sorry to interrupt the
But,
barley stream, I didn't
just-
know that's for.
Just thinking that winter barley isn't as hardy as winter rye. And of course, the Pacific Northwest is quite mild in its winters compared to here. And on the other hand, we might be able to plant it later than would be ideal to grow a decent crop of barley. It might just survive and kind of look nasty in the spring, but still support
We're gonna make it look
the
nastier.
vetch, which is probably what we want.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we did this year was we just planted our vetch and rye with the rye at a much lower rate. And so it looks real spotty through the stand, but I think it's going to do fine in terms of just supporting the vetch.
Yeah, we could, when you did the strip planting, we are sort of doing that. We have a half rate out there.
Well, the only barley that we've done so far has been by itself.
Oh.
I mean, we do have the mixes now over winter, but as far as planting the squash into terminated cover crop, it was a monoculture of barley, and so we really wanted a lot of biomass. So we planted it heavy, and we did roller crimp, but also flail, and they performed pretty similarly as far as the wheat control.
Lori had a point about.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say something about the sort of back and forth between the oats, peas, and the vetch, plus grass, some grass. I think oats and peas have their niche in the system, and they're a really useful cover crop for certain goals, you know, especially if you really need the winter kill for what you're going to next. But I think we should keep trying with vetch to find a match and, you know, reducing the rye, just because the pea just doesn't fix nearly as much nitrogen. It's not going to be able to. It's a, you know, this is a quick crop, and while you are getting some nitrogen fixation, we've been measuring it out in fields, and it is maybe 1/3 of what you can get in vetch at the most, and then even lower. I mean, vetch, you know, depending on how you're managing it and whether you're putting a late summer crop in or not, it's really going to be some, you know, crop, I mean, a cover crop is important for nitrogen fixation for us. And we've also been working with some other possible cover crops. Eric Nordell sort of pioneered the clover under. Did he do buckwheat, or what did he do over first, Brian?
Well, I'm not sure, but we've done it with
Yeah,
buckwheat,
yeah.
and that was at his suggestion. So
Yeah, so we did a number, my graduate student did a number of trials with different clovers with buckwheat to help with weed suppression. And I think that is a viable option for certain niche and rotation to get a fair amount of nitrogen. So I think a lot of us are working on, is that me?
Just go that way. Go that way. I think it's
Stay
too
away
close.
from I knew, what were you doing? I'm sending out electronic.
I wish my hair was getting
she has a big one.
I think that this, I feel, why do I have to stand over here? I think that this.
Oh, it's all just hers.
I think this issue of finding more cover crops is something that both farmers and
Probably a new battery.
the university the trial. So I think this is a really fruitful area for us to work on together and expand the palette.
Just two things. As a farmer, is the veg scares the hell out of me. Okay, gets away from me. It's a disaster. So that's why I haven't planted veg. Second of all is this year we're going to actually broadcast when the sunflowers and this, if we do the incorporated on the second cultivation, when the sunflowers up here, we're going to do in-row weed control with broadcasting. When we're cultivating, we're going to have buckwheat going in row, and then when the soil goes over, so the buckwheat would be coming up and won't be competing with the sunflowers at that time. So we're trying that as a weed suppressive control too. But I'm just saying, from it's hard enough when when the rye gets away from you, all that they can get away from you depending on how horrible the weather changes are recently. It always scares me with veg because, and I would want to ask you about that, is you flail the veg and then you
Flail both of them together at the same time.
Right.
And so we actually haven't, the veg is flowering, maybe not at peak, but we're focused on the rye, because the rye is like growing as we were watching.
Right.
I mean, at one point it was like up here, I'm like, ah! In organic, only in organic fields. So conventional fields, it never gets that
Like this
biomass.
past year in Pennsylvania, we were not able to get out because it was raining and raining and raining, and then by the time you get out, the stuff was already ahead of you.
Right. And the veg has to flower, and I mean, I don't know how widely available the early flowering varieties are, but ARS released 2. And I think we need to do some breeding work with veg, because we need to get rid of the hard seeds, or it's never going to be useful in the grain systems. And I see the hard seeds as being a real problem. Does everybody know what I mean by hard seeds? No? Okay. So veg produces seeds. It's a good strategy from the veg's perspective. Some germinate next year, but others can hang around for years. So it can become a weed in your next crop. And so that's a problem. And that actually is a trait I think that could be eliminated.
One thought or question I have and maybe other people can comment on it, with the understanding of buckwheat, are you concerned at all about that going to flower and producing seed, which will become weed later?
The idea was that I'm harvesting my sunflowers in September. If I do this, only beginning in July, that I would hopefully have it.
Get me out before.
Yes, because I'm going right into.
That's tight.
Yeah.
That's a little risky tight.
Yeah.
I'd rather have buckwheat than veg.
What about a white clover or something like that?
Possible. I was looking for the weed suppressive effect of buckwheat.
Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, one more question, then we've got to move on for the next group.
Okay. Well, this is on this whole veg cover crop thing. First of all, we found in our banging our heads against rye that killing veg with a roller crimper is extremely difficult. And second of all, and this is especially important for people who are growing things like sunflowers and legumes, veg harbors white mold. And when you roll it and it doesn't die, it gets white mold, which kills it, which is great, but not if you're growing something in the field that's going to get white mold, like sunflowers.
What is that?
It's a fungal disease. It's a sclerotinia.
Oh,
It's a really nasty. Also, you might want to consider perennial ryegrass as a solution for the turf-type perennial ryegrass as a solution
For underseeding?
for underseeding. If you use the perennial, it won't seed that first year because it has to have a winter to seed. So you don't have your weed problem, and it comes on super strong. So it'll block out.
Then how do you kill it?
I
Just
actually think
till it under and it dies.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
annual ryegrass, I think, would come on a lot faster than perennial.
The problem
And
with-
seed costs are really high on perennial.
The problem with annual, though, is it'll go to seed your first year.
But even with that late of a plant.
Yeah. It'll go right to seed. In fact, it won't do well. It'll go right to seed on it. But, yeah, we've been using a lot of turf-type perennial for living mulches in Rhode Island.
What kind of variety?
Well, I've been using whatever the grass seed
Okay,
companies
sure.
have. I don't think it really matters,
Yeah, so
though.
you're using
Well,
you know.
I bet the Italian rye doesn't go to seed until after it's been through a winter.
Not reliable that way.
That
It
is
doesn't
that's
need
a perennial
necessarily-
ryegrass.
No,
Yeah,
Italian's the
Italian's
annual,
That's the annual, okay.
but I would not trust it.
Even if it's certified.
No, because the problem is that it goes to seed faster with a winter, but it will go to seed without it.
Okay.
Done.
Thank you very